Hey everyone, welcome back to Marketing Genius Unpacked, the playbook for building and marketing AI products that win. I'm your host, Josh Porter, founder of Bit of Genius Consulting, where I help AI scale ups turn complex technology into clear, compelling stories that customers actually use to make decisions. Today's guest is a specialist who works right at the core of what this show is all about: clarity, differentiation, and relevance. I'm joined by Luke Stevens, positioning and messaging consultant and author of the book Superpositioning: Win Your Category, Nail Your Narrative, and Own Your Brand with the New Neuroscience of Positioning. With a career spanning bootstrap tech startups to scale ups that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars, Luke helps companies sharpen their positioning and nail their narrative. His work focuses on the modern neuroscience of attention to help founders and GTM leaders connect with what buyers actually care about. Luke, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Josh. I'm very excited to be here. I'm bursting with ideas and I'm very happy to be finally discussing them.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to get into a deep dive a little about what your book talks about, what you've learned along the way. So, with that, let's go with the first deep dive question. You think both classic positioning and the idea of category creation are fundamentally incomplete, and that startups in particular should build a super position instead. Why is that, and how can companies create a position that is truly differentiated but still deeply connected to what the customer values?
Yeah, so I spent years with a background in copywriting and kind of product marketing or product marketing adjacent work, working with founders and sellers and marketers to help them choose the words that actually communicated, their position and what they were about. And so, uh, in choosing those words, you quickly become interested not just in what you're saying, but why you're saying it. I.e.,
Mhm.
what is the position we're actually trying to communicate here? And so I got very interested in the classic frameworks and the popular ones that are particularly relevant to startups. And long story short, I found myself briefly, and I do stress briefly, at a very well funded scale up that had raised hundreds of millions of dollars. And they were trying to find the next step in their journey, in their position, in their narrative. And they could afford the best advice there was to buy. They could afford the most expertise, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It didn't matter. They were happy to spend it to try and get their story right.
Yeah.
And I found this very interesting. They're an incredibly transparent company, so I got to see firsthand what that looked like. But what I found was, even at this very, very top of the market with the kind of best people in the industry, they had good ideas, but those ideas didn't always work with this company in this context. And not only did it not work, there wasn't a lot of depth beyond, let's try this technique or that technique. And I was quite surprised by this. And when I sort of step back and look at the different options that were around, I kind of saw that there was one group of people whose attitude to positioning was that you had to go down and focus on the customer. And if we just
Mhm.
focus on the customer enough, then we'll find whatever it is we need to find that will help our growth.
Yeah.
Or other people who advocated that we need to take something to the customer, and what we need to take to the customer has to be something new and big and amazing. And so this idea of creating a category or having this grand narrative that would excite people, and so that was much more about the real big picture. You've got to have this big idea that you can take to them.
Hmm.
And then we might touch on this a little bit. There was also the brand people who sort of thought everyone had it wrong, and you just had to go as wide as possible. And
Right.
so I was quite confused by this, right? So I sort of saw one group of people who are busy looking down and saying, no, 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 those category people are wrong and they're crazy. And to be honest, they kind of are, but they still had something to say for what they were trying to do with this big idea. And when you're in a startup, the idea isn't just to find a niche business that you can just happily grow in a small and steady way. Like, you have to win, right? You have to be
Yeah.
in it to win it. And so there's something to be said for having that big idea that you can put on customers' radar. And so I was very confused by this. And I'm sure for your audience, Josh, if they've been looking at positioning, they might have their preferred framework or their preferred way of doing it. Maybe they sample a little bit from different approaches and just try and bring that all together. And that's great. If that works for you, that's fine. But I've found that it wasn't just that I thought these approaches were wrong in some particular way. It was that all the experts seemed to disagree. This is very confusing. I didn't know what to do for a long time. But then I started writing, and I embarked on this kind of crazy writing project where I thought there'd be something I could bring out of this that might shed some light on it. And in that process, I was fortunate enough to discover the work of one guy called Dr. Ian McGilchrist. And he
Hmm.
had a theory that shed a lot of light on what was going on. And his theory was this is where it gets to the sort of neuroscience of positioning.
Great.
Um, and that was the thing that finally clued me into what was going on and helped me understand that we could actually use all these tools together. They didn't have to be at odds with each other. We could find a place for all of them and use them in a combined way to ideally, again, in the startup world, achieve what I call a superposition, where you get above your competitors and ideally ultimately kind of transcend your category.
I love it. I love it. And I mean, the title and the word itself just makes really, it just invokes a lot of power. Super positioning. Get a way to that you are able to position yourself in such a way that you're clearly standing out from the rest of the competitors. And so, I mean, positioning is really just all about how are you positioned in the context and in comparison to others. So, being able to kind of really hone in on this, how do you increase your ability to have that perception of where you're positioned in the minds of customers are really key. And I love that you mentioned this neuroscientist that kind of helps you really kind of understand that, because it's not just about certain segments or trying to get the customers involved, which is important. And it's not just about trying to think about what is this new thing in the category that we can solve these problems that customers never even knew they had. It's about being able to really understand what motivates people, what does the neuroscience say behind this, to message your company in a way that makes you look so different from the other competitors. It's not just like slight nuances, but how do you appear so different? So that's super helpful. Um, Now, it sounds like you identified two competing schools of positioning, and that there's this theory around two modes of attention. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what they are, and where brand fits in with all of this?
Yeah, so like you said, it's positioning as an idea. It's really just a metaphor, right? Like, we're trying to find that position in some space. And so when we talk about it in a competitive sense, as marketers, we're trying to do two things. We're trying to be as close to the customer as possible. We're trying to position our product as close to their needs and their problems, their pains, their gains. But we're also trying to position ourselves relative to our competitors, and then we want to be as far away from them, as differentiated from them as possible. And I think in startups in particular, it can be really tricky to hold those two things in tension, because you have to both find the smallest, most narrow place you can start and get started, and that's the sort of niche school, excuse me, of positioning, where it's all about finding that very key ICP or job to be done, or
Yeah.
vertical, or whatever it might be that you can get started with. But you also do need this big idea, this big picture, something you're aiming for. And obviously, if you've raised money for a reason, right? Like, you've
Yeah.
raised money because you've convinced investors and you believe that there is a really big opportunity that you can go after, that there is a vision out there that your startup is uniquely able to achieve. So holding those two things in tension is quite difficult. But those two approaches kind of reflect the two schools of positioning, particularly in B2B, if you like, where again, we're talking about this approach of finding your best customer and just focusing on them, or this kind of expansive category or narrative based approach. And again, they seem to be in conflict with each other. But the real insight from Ian McGilchrist's work, and he writes these phenomenally deep, big, dense books with hundreds of references, sort of going through the neuroscience and his take on Western civilization. Like, they're big
Oh,
themes. They're
wow.
they're they're very deep books. But at the heart of it is a very, very simple idea that I found explains these two approaches to positioning, and explains a lot of what we're trying to do with startups on the whole. And so it comes down to this idea of the hierarchy of attention, and it comes
Mm.
back to uh, split brain theory. And Josh, I'm sure you have heard the idea about well, the kind of pop science idea of your right brain is creative and
Yes.
emotional, and your left brain is cold and rational and analytical. It's important to say, when we get into this kind of left brain, right brain stuff, that original idea was debunked, and it just wasn't especially true. The idea that just one side of your brain did this thing and the other side did that thing isn't accurate. So both sides of your brain are involved in everything all the time. But McGilchrist's insight is that your left and right hemisphere are physically different. There still is something there about your brain that suggests that they have some unique role. And in his view, and this theory around attention, he suggests that our right brain attends to the world as what I like to say, our radar. So it's the one that's looking out at the horizon, at what's
Okay.
new, at in an evolutionary in an evolutionary sense, it's looking out for threats, basically, so you don't get eaten. Um,
Yeah.
and your left hemisphere is looking down and helping you do tasks. It's the narrow focus part of it, and that's helping you eat. So if you're a bird, for example, you're focused very narrowly on the seeds you're pecking out between the rocks. And so they're the kind of, broadly speaking, two modes of attention that we all attend to the world with. And you can see, just through that description, how that matches very neatly these sort of two schools of positioning that we
Yeah.
see. And so eventually I realized these things weren't at odds with each other. They were just people speaking from their kind of own personal attention preferences, if you like.
Mm.
So if you're someone that really prefers to do this sort of narrow focused attention, then you're probably going to lean towards that way of looking at things, that way of looking at your positioning and your story. And likewise, if you're, consider yourself more, quote unquote, big picture person,
Yeah.
you're, a visionary founder or marketer or whatever it might be, you might be much more inclined to be looking out at that big picture. And so
Right.
between those two things, to me, it's really a question of how can we get them working together, and what's the net result. And in that sense, I think the sort of third prong, if you like, of my framework and how I see positioning coming together is that we use these two modes of attention to attend to the world. And what does that attention do? Well, it creates memories, right? Like we attend to the world, we remember things or we don't. And those memories are where the brand piece really comes in. And if you look at like the B2C world and the kind of marketing science that they focus on, they've got quite a well articulated theory of branding being a name need memory association where,
Mm,
here Salesforce, think CRM. Here
yes.
Squarespace, think
Website.
websites.
Yeah.
Right, that's it. That's it. So to me, they're the kind of three prongs, if you like, of what I call superpositioning, where it's not just about doing one or the other. It's not just about focusing down on our customers, or it's not just about thinking about the brand and how far we can push it, but bringing them all together, I think, is the most powerful way we can, really rethink positioning, and particularly again in startups where you really have to win.
Yeah. No, and that's really interesting to kind of think about those kind of the left brain, right brain thing where, you know, putting aside the creativity and the analytic piece, but what I understand McGilchrist saying is you've got these kind of big picture thinking side of your brain. You've also got the kind of more detail oriented side of the brain, and that positioning, you really need to kind of think about which mode you're trying to speak to. You're trying to be able to get capture kind of that visionary type of attention, or are you trying to get that super detailed attention? And that's going to be very different depending on the person, depending on the industry, depending on the products. And so it's it's a great additional way to think about positioning, because often it's like, well, we just need to think about who the customers are and who the competitors are and then go from there. But I like this additional element of we need to think about how our brains are receiving some of this positioning. So I really like this the way you're putting this together.
Thanks.
All right. Now the next question we're going to is obviously a big thing for companies right now is AI. It feels like the market's really changed over the last couple years. What signals should leaders look for that their positioning no longer fits in the market and it's time for a shift?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. And just to speak briefly to what you were saying there too about the big picture and the details as well. When I was at the startup, there was a kind of visionary kind of founder, and they had that attitude of really looking out the horizon. And they had product marketers, they had product managers, and those people were very much, down focused at um, the customer and really in the weeds in that way. And they really struggled to bring those two things together. And so when we talk about like the AI wave that's been sweeping startups, tech, the world, anything and everything, it really is a bit of a juggling act of balancing those two things. And I feel like it's been quite interesting to sort of study positioning and kind of recent attitudes to it. You sort of see the pendulum swinging backwards and forwards between, early on in the SaaS era when, say, the early 2010s, some companies are really making a name for themselves with a big narrative, and even Salesforce, to go back to the OG of SaaS itself, had
Yeah.
this really strong narrative of no software, the way of being, don't use on-prem software, use our web software, which was a crazy and radical idea at the time. And then you even get companies like HubSpot, who famously tried to start in a vertical. They tried to start as LegalSpot, and that didn't work. And they pivoted and went horizontal and really took their concept of inbound marketing to the world. And people talk about that as a category, but it's not really a category. It was their particular concept and playbook for the market. And they had that vision that there was a change in the way that marketing was happening. And they were able to marry or they'll have to name a playbook for that, I should say, and marry that to their tool. And then if we move sort of further along, you sort of get this era of a much more mature SaaS world where the interest in finding that high CP and that exact customer really becomes more prevalent because the market's so saturated. So you have to think harder about uh, where exactly you want to play and where exactly you're going to compete in the market. And so I feel like these things sort of ebb and flow a little bit, and the pendulum swings back and forth. And then the AI wave hits, and of course now things are back to that more narrative driven approach where everyone's figuring this out together, and people have been literally told, go out and buy an AI tool. We need to have an AI strategy. You need to go out and get something. And that's from a vendor's point of view, less a
Yeah.
question of differentiation in that kind of minute sense, though that might still be an important part of your pitch. But that narrative angle, that vision that you have for the market, for where you're taking a particular role or function, or even the nature of white collar work itself, or the nature of
Yeah.
customer support itself across all companies everywhere. There's a much bigger role for narrative, and so I feel like these two aspects, and again, just coming back to our modes of attention, our what we're sort of putting on people's right brain radar, and then answering questions on their left brain laser beam, as I like to put
Right.
it, is very important to bring those things together and sort of come to that final brand memory. But if you're thinking about this, like, okay, I get the theory, but what do we actually do with it, or how do I know if I need to use this, or like where do I start? Something I like to focus on, just in the simplest way to think about it, and the simplest idea is just what I call your hook test. So, do
Mhm.
you have a hook that buyers will engage with, and it resonates? And if you put that to them, that they'll respond positively. And when you look at some of these real big winners in a SaaS and startup sense, and now with the AI wave, you often see that there's a very simple hook there. So that could be something as simple as HubSpot. You mentioned like inbound marketing.
Yeah.
Stripe, it was just payments for developers. Like
Yeah.
that's 3 words. And with the AI age, we see there's companies in legal tech like Spellbook who are doing like 10x contracts development for lawyers, and they've got a very tight pitch around that. Some other, again in legal tech, might be a much more expansive pitch about how white collar work is being done at all. And so we sort of see people trying to find their spot in the market, whether that's leaning more on narrative or more on niche. But either way, it just comes back to this very simple idea of, do you have a really tight and compelling hook that you can put to customers? And if you're not sure if you have that, the opposite that I like to contrast this with is the idea of the value blob. And so
Mm.
sometimes if people aren't quite sure if they've got that hook, or they're not totally confident in what they're putting in front of a potential buyer or prospect, they'll roll together several value props, several little ideas, and it might be, well, we automate this and our agents do that, and that gets more visibility and improved workflows. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like, sure, like that all might be true, like they all might be great value props in your pitch or your homepage or whatever, but if you just roll them together, it doesn't actually make something that's greater than the sum of its parts. It's just a blob. You really want a hook instead. So uh, that's how I like to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's good to kind of tie in what you were talking about with the kind of vision brain versus the detail side of the brain, and how that in the context of B2B SaaS you're thinking about what how do you differentiate against these other B2B SaaS players and now AI players? How are you able to differentiate that and how can you tell? I like how you brought this up about the hook test. How do you really understand if that you're really hooking people by what you're trying how you're trying to position yourself? And that value blob piece where you mentioned is kind of like getting aggregating some of that information to try to get get a better understanding of what works and what doesn't. I think that's great. I think it's a great approach to kind of think about beyond the traditional ways of am I positioned against this competitor well based on what the Gartner Magic Quadrant shows me, or do I hear that customers think I'm better at this AI tool than others? So I like this. This is good. This is a great additional way to think about positioning just than kind of the standard
Thanks. And it
standard.
also, just sorry to interject, it also just helps crystallize a lot of work that ends up buried in pitch decks or positioning decks where people do the work and they kind of do their homework and come up with a deck that helps them think about how they think internally, and they don't need to really crystallize it all the way down into a very tight hook because they're internal. Like they get it, we get the product, we get the market, but
Mhm.
it's that question of can you go from your internal deck or whatever it might be to a hook that actually captures the imagination of your market.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely agree. All right. So next question is about you kind of making this point about positioning shouldn't just be in a slide deck. It should be ultimately something that exists in the buyer's mind. How do you operationalize super positioning so it lands in the customer's minds rather than just being a marketing artifact?
Yeah, sure. So in my process, I spent 3 years sort of writing the book and thinking through these ideas. And I personally got very into the ideas. I love I love getting into the theory, but uh, and for me, with a kind of copywriting background, it was kind of like, oh, and then you would just write it out, and that would be easy because that
Yeah.
was the thing that I did. But of course, people have all different kinds of specialities and interests, and really drilling down into the words might not be one of them. So I took a step back and realized, okay, there needs to be a simple sort of hands-on approach to actually doing this. And so I came up with just a very simple kind of 3-step approach to walk people through the process of landing on something that sort of gets them towards that hook, towards that sort of catchy positioning, but has the right ingredients. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of just, opening up a homepage, a slide deck, whatever it might be, and thinking, okay, I've got it right. But you're going to sort of struggle with that, blank page syndrome. So
Yeah.
instead, I like to suggest people think about 3 kind of strategic areas. And I say strategy because this is really about your choices. So you've got to think
Mm.
hard about the actual choices you're making. And I think positioning is a means of doing strategy, and strategy is about choices. So I like to start with your strategic specifics, if I can put it that way. So
Okay.
what is it about you that is particularly um, unique and new, and whatever it is that makes you special? And we talked about these sort of 2 modes of attention before. And when we think about the specifics, I like to break them down along those two modes of attention as well. So very briefly, on the kind of right brain radar side, what are we fundamentally putting on our customers' radar? So they are keeping that sort of broad attention out into the world, and they need to see something that's interesting to them that they might pursue further. And
Yep.
Stuart Butterfield, the co-founder of Slack, He had a great memo, one of the all-time classics called "We Don't Sell Saddles Here." And he identified these sort of three aspects that I really think illustrate this kind of attention and the specifics you might be dealing with. So one of them is the fundamental technology. So if you're an AI lab and you're creating, a new model or whatever it might be, then your pitch is the technology itself, right? You've made this new breakthrough. From there, that might be the tool itself. So if you're operating at the application layer and you're taking this new AI tech and the latest model or using an LLM in some unique way, you might be taking that tool to the market, and what you're putting on people's radar is the innovation at that application layer that is fundamentally new and unique. Or thirdly, it might be the transformation that you're bringing to the market. And so we've seen a lot of companies, a lot of startups get criticized maybe for just being a GPT wrapper. You're just a wrapper.
Yeah.
And the idea is, you're not fundamental technology. You're not maybe an absolute breakthrough tool. But the mistake in that kind of thinking is that there is enormous value in bringing this technology and bringing tools to specific parts of the enterprise or any business really, and that transformation aspect is where a lot of value is, and it is one of the hardest parts of introducing technology to the market. So there can be a lot of value there as well, and that might be something you encapsulate in a playbook, and that playbook might be part of your brand, as per again, to go back to HubSpot as a classic example.
Yeah.
So yeah, that idea of technology, tool, or transformation, I find to be a helpful way just to think about your kind of strategic specifics at a very high level. And then if we kind of switch gears into that left brain laser beam and get out
Yeah.
that narrow focused attention, then it might be a question of drilling down to. I like to use just the old 5 W's and 1 H: the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And that's when
Mm.
you get into that sort of classic sort of positioning discussion about, okay, who are we for? Who really is our ICP, or what happens in their journey that triggers them to want to buy something or look for a new tool, and maybe how are we different from competing solutions in the space. And that's when you start to draw out those differences there. But again, it's those two modes of attention working together that I think is the most effective way to think about the inputs into your positioning. So
Yeah.
that's step one. Step two is, okay, we've got our specifics and we've thought really hard about them. Now we need to align around something where we all agree this is what we're about and this is what we're taking to the market. And so to drive that alignment, I really like to think about a strategic narrative. And now strategic narratives come in different shapes and sizes. I like to follow a very simple, again, a little 3-step approach to them that, again, follows this model of attention we're working with. So when you're putting together a little strategic narrative, it can just be a simple slide deck. It's really about the words. It's not about something very glossy and pretty, but just 10 slides, for example, where you might have one which states your positioning and where you've landed up front. I find bottom line up front a very important thing to lead with.
Yeah.
But then going through this, the 3 prongs of super positioning in my framework, or just attention more fundamentally. Again, starting with that right brain radar, what's going on, what's the narrative, what's the change, what's the fundamental idea you're putting on people's radar. So that's a good place to start. And then again, going from the right brain big picture down into those left brain specifics about how your product specifically helps a given ICP or a given need in the market, and how that in a very focused and particular way solves the problem or the issue you've highlighted, and then bringing that all together in a kind of new integrated whole. And this is kind of getting towards the brand piece, where
Okay.
what does this mean for the user, for the team, for the business on the whole? What's the personal value? Like, how is the buyer's world different for them personally after they've adopted your tool? And maybe what does it mean for the business as well? So that approach of going from the big picture down into the specifics and bringing it together into a whole is something I'm sure people are familiar with. Like, that is not a breakthrough in and of itself, but
Yeah.
what's useful and what's really helpful to know is that this is, again, an idea from McGilchrist, how we fundamentally process information in our minds and how we use attention in the world. We go from the right brain, outward looking attention. We chop things up into parts and pieces to be analyzed, the left brain, and then we bring it all together in a reintegrated whole. And so to me, it just makes sense that we would follow this model of how we integrate information ourselves in how we integrate the information about the position or narrative we're trying to build in the market. And of course, in your specific context, then, because you know that there's kind of two different stories, like that big picture story, the narrow focus story,
Yeah.
and this sort of brand takeaway. When you know that they're the three elements you have to play with, you can then stretch them and you can use more of one or less of the other, and know what kind of attention you're engaging with and what kind of attention you're trying to engage with on the buyer's side as well. So to me, that's a very helpful model for just making sure everyone is aligned, both internally and then when you take it to the market as well, that you're reaching the kind of attention that your buyers are using as well, because we all use these fundamental modes of attention. So we go from our specifics. We've thought really hard about things. We understand the ingredients. We align around them in just a simple narrative that mirrors the way we process information at all. And then finally, we need to execute, and that's tends to be the messaging side of things,
Hmm.
and that's often just thought of as, oh, if the other, the big thoughts, the big vision, the customer focus, that's the strategy, then execution is something different. But I don't see it like that. I see execution as where you actually have to follow through on your choices. You
Hmm.
actually have to make them real. You have to have the courage to then say, okay, we really are just going to focus on these people, or we really are going to go all in with a big idea or bring them together in some unique way. And you need to make that clear in, your homepage, your pitch decks. And again, when we come back to this idea of just a big idea, coming back to specifics, and then remembering something about it, even the way you go to market reflects this model. So you might lean on that big change story for your socials and a podcast like this, for example, or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. And then buyers are going to come to the homepage, and if they're coming to the homepage, they probably don't need the whole big picture spiel all over again, right? They
Yeah.
might be in a mode of attention where they're wondering, is this the right tool for me? And then maybe they become customers, they start using your tool, and your customer success team helps them achieve this new integrated whole that gives them the happy memory, the happy name need association that your buyer then takes back out to the market, and they put their experience and their memory back on other people's radar, and this cycle starts again. So again, just a very simple theory about how we attend to the world, just I found manifested in every level of what we do all the time. It was just coming back to these very simple three prongs. And so on the final execution side, that's where I see you wrapping up your output. So we've gone from sort of inputs, alignment, and output, and hopefully done that in a way that really ultimately builds that position in the buyer's mind, because we've understood the buyer's mind in a much more fundamental sort of first principles way.
I like that. I like that way you're able to kind of operationalize all this superpositioning in like three main areas where you're getting into those strategic specifics on who, what, where, why, and really kind of breaking it down. Is this going to be a tech tool or transformation? And then what's that strategic narrative about the story you're trying to tell to the customer? And then ultimately, what is that all going to boil down to is the messaging, the strategic messaging. What is it going to look like on your homepage? What's it going to look like on your pitch deck? So I really like that, how you're able to kind of take everything we talked about earlier in terms of positioning, where the neuroscience connects, how our brains work, and then really encapsulate it in these kind of three main steps. So I really think that's a great way to kind of end cap such a heavy yet important discussion, and something that is honestly a lot of times can be ethereal. Positioning and product marketing, like, it's not always this like very clear cut. Messaging everybody gets. Positioning, sometimes people blend it with messaging. And so I really think that this has been a really good breakdown, Luke, from the framework perspective that you provided with positioning, super positioning. And I really see how this is kind of a more holistic approach around how companies can think more deeply about how they're doing the positioning and stop choosing kind of the lazy version of positioning and focus their minds on who they're trying to reach. So before we close shop, we're going to do our traditional rapid fire round. So we're going to do 5 quick questions and answer the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you ready, Luke?
Let's do it, Josh.
All right. Favorite marketing tool?
Favorite marketing tool is Figma. I live in Figma, and just yesterday I went through all the book covers I made while procrastinating in Figma and found there was 475 variations. So that's how much I love Figma.
Yeah, you've definitely spent a lot of time in that. Wow. That's awesome.
That's right.
Great. Yes, Figma is a great tool for sure. What's the most underrated skill in product marketing?
I'm incredibly biased, but I would say copywriting. And I
Yes,
know that everyone is leaning on AI tools these days, and I'm sure that helps sort of raise the floor a little bit. But I would encourage people to really develop that skill if they can, even in the AI age, because in a world of slop, if you can write, it stands out.
absolutely. Yeah, that's really honestly the fundamental skill of a product marketer is the ability to write. And yes, you are a little biased because you were a copywriter before, but that is still the fundamental piece because you're writing copy for blogs, you're writing copy for demos, you're writing copy uh, for your messaging house, all kinds of assets and strategic documents that really hone in on that particular skill. So definitely agree with you there. What's the biggest mistake to avoid in product marketing?
I feel like a lot of product marketers get a little stuck in that they end up in a order taking role where everyone's saying to them, we need this, we need that, we need this deliverable, we need that deck, we need to update this page. And it's to me a little bit ironic because product marketers are kind of tasked with positioning, but then aren't given much strategic leeway to actually
Yes,
do that work. And so, again, I'm very biased, but I hope my framework and this kind of more strategic approach helps people get out of that order taking mode and think a bit more about what the business needs.
totally, totally. What's one thing you wish you knew when you started?
Really, the kind of B2B and enterprise world existed at all. And I think a lot of people come into this world sort of knowing what marketing is and what product marketing might be, uh, just from what they're exposed to as consumers. But when you get into the sales world, to me, it's very interesting. It's much more high stakes, and there's a lot at play. There's a lot of messaging and positioning work to be done, of course. So to me, that's really been fascinating. But yeah, you kind of have to stumble your way into it. No one's sort of broadcasting, hey, here's what it's like to, buy a piece of software for $100,000 or $1 million or whatever it might be.
Yeah, yeah. You're not playing on a playground as a 5-year-old thinking, what do I want to do with my life?
Right.
Oh, I'll go into B2B SaaS. Yeah.
Enterprise
Yeah,
software.
enterprise. Let me make that a career path. So,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah. Yeah, it's I remember when I was that age, I was thinking, man, I want to be a Spider-Man pencil artist for Marvel. That was a clear, concrete thing
For
at that age.
sure.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
um, awesome. All right. And last question, what's your favorite podcast?
So, so I'm going to throw something out there that I'm not sure if everyone will be familiar with. This is not a business podcast by any stretch.
Doesn't
It's a
have to be.
comedy podcast. It's called the Beef and Dairy Network Podcast. Those that know will know, but it's a British podcast that has been around for about 10 years now. And it's, to me, a legendary podcast, one of the best examples of the medium ever, and a real much loved cult hit, maybe you could say, that yeah, is worth going back to square one and just embracing the world that they've created. It's hilarious and incredible.
No, I like it. That's good. I haven't heard of it. I'll check it out. I'm a big fan of comedy, so that's nice here. I'm glad you provided something that wasn't business because that's all
Right.
everybody heard today. So
Yeah, it's not all
awesome.
enterprise sauce.
Yeah, the whole world doesn't revolve around that, believe it or
Yeah.
not. All right, Luke, well, thanks again for joining me. I think this was really a great episode. It was packed with a lot of insight. And those that are listening can check out Luke's book that was just released, Superpositioning, on Amazon. And for Luke, I want to thank you for being here today. Really good insights, and really appreciate what you were able to share. And I want to say to everyone that's listening, this has been another episode of Marketing Genius Unpacked, the show where we break down how AI scale ups can build products, craft narratives, and execute go to market strategies that win. You can catch this episode on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. The links are in the description. I'm Josh Porter from Bit of Genius Consulting. We'll see you next time.